And ready.
No worries. Let's try and make sure
We
this
are
is
live. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Isolation Inspiration. Firstly, I should apologise, Ken, at 10 this morning, for those of you watching, a slight malfunction. The mic wasn't working, so I have to supplement that with a Ken at 12 today or something. But anyway, I'm really pleased to tell you we have, for Isolation Inspiration, the lovely Georgia, and she's agreed to come back for us. She's an epidemiologist, came on the show back in May, predicted the second wave, and is very modest about that. I remember at the time being shocked, and many of our viewers were as well. So here we are. We're still in the pandemic. Georgia, it's lovely to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming back. I think you really do give valuable input to our viewers and listeners. Last time you were on the show, you predicted the second wave. So where will we be in 6 months from now? What do you think's happening now?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer. And I just want to preface this whole kind of predicting the second wave as well. Like, I think most epidemiologists sort of predicted it at the start of the pandemic because, coronavirus didn't go away over the summer. It's always been grumbling away. We started to open up a lot more, which means that people are mixing more. And also it's the autumn season, which is where respiratory viruses tend to kick off. As you might be able to hear, I have a cold. So, this is just the season where kind of, other coronaviruses that we have, and now this one too are kicking off. So yeah, the second wave, it's not that much of a surprise, but it's kind of up to us, like, how much of a big wave it's going to be. As to where we're going to be in 6 months, that's a really interesting question. And I think the answer to that is that no one really knows at this stage. It's still a new virus. We haven't really, we don't know what's going to happen in the autumn and winter. Sometimes for flu, for example, we can look to what happened in the Southern Hemisphere because they had their winter before us and then have an idea of what's coming our way. But, because their winter was basically when they were having full lockdowns and things like that, it's not really a comparable season. So, this whole kind of like being quite open now and, the weather getting colder and coronavirus picking up and flu potentially picking up, we don't know what we're going to see over the next 6 months. But I would hope that when we come into the spring next year, if we've managed to kind of keep a lid on things with testing and tracing and things like that, then hopefully, we'll be 6 months closer to having a vaccine. Hopefully things will start to tail off again if it does prove to be a seasonal virus. So I think if we can get through these 6 months, they're going to be hard, but there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you. And we are live, so I should say, anybody, whatever channel you're watching on, if you do ask a question, it will come up and we can pass that on to Georgia for you, who will try her best to answer it. Second question for you. What do you think about the government rules right now?
Yeah, so I know, like, it's all kind of quite complicated for people what's going on at the moment. And I think the government does have a difficult role at the moment because there's a fine line to tread, and there's no sort of there's no precedent for this. So there's not like a textbook of coronavirus pandemics that can be consulted so that we can pick exactly what's the best control measure in exactly what context. And they're trying to strike this delicate balance of having schools open, having some sense of normality so that you can go out with your friends and sit in a pub or sit in a restaurant, so that the economy can begin to recover a little bit from these huge kind of lockdown restrictions that we had early in the year. So there's that one side, but on the flip side of that, we also don't want the health service getting overwhelmed again. We don't want to see increased hospitalizations and deaths, which are starting to happen now. And we don't want to see, increased numbers of people getting ill with long COVID. So there's this kind of fine balance. It's sort of a dance that needs to be done. And it's also a bit of a movable feast as well, because, the situation changes really fast. It's hard to predict. While it's changing, we're also learning more about the virus and how it transmits. And we learn from what goes on in our own national and local context, and also what's happening on, going on abroad. And there's also more scientific breakthroughs. So, things change and they change fast, and they can kind of be portrayed as sort of, U-turns, but they're not so much U-turns as kind of we have more knowledge or the situations change. But it does then, lead to this sense of confusion amongst the public that, they don't quite know what's going on. So it's this kind of need to be able to respond in an agile way to this ever-changing situation, which can come across as sort of, conflicting messages. But I think what the government is aiming to do really is to have as much of a sense of normality as possible, and being really locally responsive to when the coronavirus is taking off again, so that we don't lose control of the epidemic. So I feel for them. It's not an easy game to play this
Yeah,
one.
they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, really, aren't they?
Yeah,
But come on,
and there'll always be someone criticizing, and there always will be kind of genuine and, you know, understandable criticism of any control measure that's put in place, because whatever's put in place is going to disadvantage some groups.
Yes.
So it's a hard one to tread. Yeah.
But you wrote one of the most concise explanations of the methodology and the theory behind what they're trying to do that I've read. So I'll come on to that in a minute. But first of all, what do you think about the alternative strategy that some scientists are proposing, targeted shielding and herd immunity?
Yeah, I can understand why people are excited by this idea, and, you know, why it's attractive, because it's this idea that, you know, we could just kind of sort of go back to normal and let it wash over us, and it'll just be, you know, like one difficult period, and then, you know, all of a sudden after that it'll be sunshine and roses. And I can totally understand why that's a more attractive option than this like protracted, you know, you have to keep social distancing, you have to keep doing, you know, whatever. But personally, I just think it's a super bad idea for several reasons. So the first one is long COVID, which is something that doesn't get very much media attention, but it's that you know, that people can have this form of the disease where they don't get hospitalized. It's not severe enough for them to be hospitalized, but they can end up suffering, like, you know, really debilitating symptoms for several weeks or months after being infected. And long COVID, we're not really counting it very well. We've not really done much research into it yet, so we don't really understand it very well. But it does seem to be affecting kind of younger age groups than we see, you know, affected by hospitalizations and severe illness. Also, people that don't have any underlying conditions whatsoever. So I think we need to get away from this kind of like, you know, deaths narrative, or, you know, that COVID only affects old people or vulnerable people, because that's not true. Like, it can affect like a lot more people than sort of the herd immunity theory, you know, targeted shielding strategy that's proposed refers to. I also find that it's just very ableist and very ageist and very racist to kind of say, oh, you know, well, it's just let it rip, and those that are vulnerable will just have to kind of, you know, shield themselves. You know, there are massive mental health effects of having to shield. It's really horrible having to shield. And to kind of say, well, you know, anyone that's over 65 or anyone that has, you know, underlying disabilities needs to squirrel themselves away in their homes so that we can all get on with our lives, I just think is just, you know, just quite a selfish way of looking at things. And also the racist angle, in that we know that COVID has been disproportionately affecting people from Black minority ethnic populations. So it's just, yeah, like I don't like that theory. I think it's coming from a very privileged position. And also it won't work because, you know, people are interlinked and they're intergenerational households, and, you know, people that have vulnerabilities have carers who mix in the community. So we can't isolate from each other anyway. And it relies on this ultimate goal of herd immunity at the end, which is, it's just a hypothesis at the moment. We don't really understand COVID immunity right now, so we don't really know whether natural infection and herd immunity is going to be something that will bring the outbreak to an end. So, I mean, there's just all sorts of reasons why I think it's nonsensical. Although it sounds like a, you know, on the face of it, a sensible thing to do, I think it's very unsensible, in my opinion. Yeah.
Now, coming on to what I was alluding to earlier, can you articulate why it's okay to be in a restaurant and not with friends at home? Because I think your explanation to this was so good. And so often we hear the government messages and they're not as clear as you are. So could you articulate the thinking behind that?
Yeah, I'll try. And thank you for saying that my explanation of that was succinct, because that was one of the longest Facebook posts I've ever written in my life, I think. So it's good that, you know, it's readable at least. So I think, you know, there's three main elements to this. So the first is that we're not actually that great as a species at assessing our own risks. And when we're in our own homes and we're with people who feel familiar in kind of a safe place, we tend to let our guard down. So, you know, and we'll spend a longer time there as well. So, you know, you go and visit your parents and you stay several hours. You don't, you know, distance from them. You might do when you start, like, you know, when you get there, but as you feel more relaxed and you have a cup of tea or whatever, then you just get a bit looser. In somebody's home, they're not going to be wiping down surfaces as often as will happen at a restaurant. It's probably not as well ventilated, all those kinds of things. Whereas if you're going to a restaurant, it's a space that's been risk assessed. There's space between the tables. It's sitting down only, so you're not kind of able to sort of stand up and mix. You're not there too long, like a couple of hours usually. You're signed in to test and trace. There's regular cleaning. So, if you're in a COVID secure place, and I emphasize that, like I have been to a restaurant relatively recently where, it was very crowded and there was lots of background noise and, we were shouting to hear each other and we were close to each other. And that is not a good COVID place to be. I would have been safer at my parents' house. But in general, if you're at an establishment that is COVID secure, then you're likely to kind of be at a lower risk than if you're mixing in somebody's house. And that's kind of borne out by the data that we have on transmission, in that, like, a lot of transmission seems to be happening in household settings, which is why those limits have been put on. So that's one element. The second element is obviously the economy, and people don't like talking about that. It sounds kind of harsh to sort of say, oh, it's health versus the economy, but actually that's kind of a false dichotomy, really, because you need a healthy economy for people to be healthy. We have in public health what we call the sort of wider determinants of health. So, if people to be healthy need to be able to, have a job, have a house, have income security, have, a good education and that kind of thing. So the economy public health relies on the economy, which is why, there's these glib kind of memes kind of going around that, think places are COVID secure if they have a till in and that kind of thing. But actually, the economy is really central to public health. So that's something that needs to be remembered as well. And then I just think sort of the third thing to remember is, I hear a lot of kind of people saying, oh, well, my child's going to school now, is mixing with loads of people, so why shouldn't I be able to have a birthday party? It doesn't make sense. But we're in the kind of domain of risk reduction now, not risk elimination. We can't get rid of all of the risks. So we have to kind of choose what we're going to do and what we're not going to do, and there will be trade-offs. So the analogy that I always use is kind of a car. So car safety. So you don't just have a seatbelt. You also have an airbag. You also have kind of the metal frame of the car. You also have speed limits and all those kinds of things to make you safe. And if you were to stop doing one, like, if you were driving along the car and the brakes then started feeling spongy, you wouldn't then kind of throw caution to the wind and say, oh, okay, fine, well, I'm going to disable the airbag and I'm going to take my seatbelt off. You'd actually do more things to keep you safe in other ways. And that's sort of what we're at now. And it's trying to find that balance of what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. And one of the things you said in your article, which I thought was quite good and well put, was that when you're around a friend's house, you're in the garden, you're having a few drinks, it rains, you come in, almost definitely two of you have now got each other's glasses. Then you have some drinks. Then you're a bit whiffy. Then before you know it, you're having a cuddle with people because you're a little bit drunk. And that doesn't tend to happen in the restaurant setting, does it?
Yeah. And, it's not even because we're a little bit drunk. It's also because we really miss each other. And, if you're shut up in your house and you're feeling really safe, and you just think, oh, you know what, I'm just going to give my dad a cuddle because I really miss him.
We miss that human contact.
Yeah, of course we do. This is a really, really hard situation that we're in. So, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that you can advise us that we can do that we're not doing already to protect ourselves and our families, Georgia?
I think, it's kind of following the government guidance, I suppose. So, the rules are confusing, but the take-homes are probably things that you know already. So first of all, like the hands, face and space. So the hands is frequent hand washing. The face is masking your face when you're in crowded areas or indoors, and the space is meeting people at distance, so preferably 2 meters, and out of those 3 things, probably the space is the more important. So there's that, and then there's also ventilation, which is really, really crucial actually, and probably isn't getting enough airtime because it's not like segued into that nice 3-word slogan. Yeah, but if you meet people outdoors, your risk is just so much lower than if you meet people indoors. And if you're meeting people indoors, like, throw open the windows, throw open the doors. It's a really good time to invest in like some woolly hats and layers at the moment, because if we want to continue to socialize safely over the winter, and I think we need to, for our mental health. Like doing that in outdoor spaces is really critical. And natural ventilation is where it's at, like not air conditioning, because air conditioning can actually suck air up and pass it around a room. So, you want the windows open, you want the doors open, preferably you want to be outside as long as it's not, hammering down with rain. Also, just limiting your contacts. So I think this winter is the time to decide who your absolutely favorite people are. And, you see those people in person to keep yourself sane. And the people who are more kind of fringe people in your life, like socialize with them via Zoom, because, the less we're interacting with people, the less we're going to be able to sort of pass this bug around. So have a kind of slow sort of social life. It's really easy for me to say that because I've got 2 children aged 2 and 5, so mine was slow already. But yeah, and also kind of spacing out seeing people as well. So if you see a big group of people at one weekend, like leave it a week until you see another big group of people, just so that you're not seeing loads and loads and loads and loads of people in a short space of time. And then if you were to get a call from test and trace the next day, you'd have millions of people that you'd have to list on your close contacts. So I always kind of feel like it's a good rule of thumb to imagine if you were tested COVID positive and called by an NHS test and trace person, would you be proud or would you be embarrassed by the number of close contacts you would have to list for those people? So that's always a good rule of thumb. So those are the things that you can do kind of every day. If you get symptoms, get tested. That's really important. I know there are problems with getting tests at the moment, and you do have to sit around and refresh the screen for hours, and that's frustrating. But it's super important that we can track who has cases so that we can then interrupt chains of transmission. And contact tracing is going to be really, really key for us to be able to keep on top of this over the autumn and winter. Quarantine as well if you need to. So if you've been in close contact with someone with symptoms, or
what about the app, Georgia?
Sorry, I was going to come to that. So yeah, the app is really important as well, because that will help us. You know who your close contacts are, as in people that you've spent time with and are friends with, but you don't necessarily know who that person was that you were right next to on the bus for half an hour last week kind of thing. So the app will be really helpful for sort of tracing those kinds of contacts that you wouldn't necessarily be able to direct test and trace to yourself. I know people are worried about the data privacy angle, but actually the app it's not developed by central government. I think it's Google and Apple that are behind it, and they won't be. I think all the data on it is kept on your phone, and privacy stuff is no more of an issue than if you're shopping at Amazon or whatever. And then another thing that you can do to keep your family and just basically society safe this year is to get your flu vaccination. So that might be a bit counterintuitive because, COVID isn't flu. But flu tends to cause big winter pressures on the health service every year. So we want to sort of limit the amount of co-infection, the amount of flu that's circulating at the same time as COVID circulating. So the NHS isn't having to sort of fight 2 fires at the same time. And also, we don't really know kind of what co-infection with flu and COVID is like either. So we don't know whether, that could, but it probably would be good if you got both at the same time. So it's good to sort of protect yourself against that. There's a lot of risk groups who are entitled to a free vaccination anyway. So you should have been contacted by your GP or by the NHS to say that. And that includes children. And I think historically we've had really low uptake of flu vaccination for kids because parents kind of think, well, but flu's not that bad a disease for children. So why would I bother getting them vaccinated for something like that? But actually, where children are concerned, unlike COVID, they are super spreaders of flu. So they don't get that ill, but they transmit it a whole lot. So if we can kind of get high levels of vaccination amongst children this year, then hopefully it'll bring our flu levels right down, and that'll just basically, help the health service not get overwhelmed. So it's sort of we had stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. This is get flu jabs or nasal spray if it's children, protect the NHS, save lives instead. So those are all kind of infectious disease type things that you can do to keep your family and yourself safe. But I think one thing that's overlooked a lot of the time is mental health. And I think we're all at a pretty low ebb at the moment. And this has been going on for a long, long time. We're tired. We miss people. We've been in this kind of heightened state of anxiety for a really long time. We don't know what the future holds. And I think, you know, we should all be paying attention to making sure we actively do stuff to keep us mentally well, whether that's, you know, getting regular exercise, going outside, making sure that we connect with people that we love. And, you know, if you are finding it kind of difficult, then I know that the Mind website, which is a mental health charity, has a lot of kind of good resources on their website. So it's worth looking on that. And then, yeah, I think my last word of wisdom would just be, we just need to be kind to each other. Let's all just be kind to each other, because, you know, I see now on social media, people kind of, you know, there's a lot of blaming and shaming and shouting at each other.
Yeah,
a lot of anger. Yeah. And I think we need to sort of all calm down a little bit and just recognize each other's humanity and recognize that people respond to crises in different ways, and, you know, just try and be kind, would be my take.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we're all in this together, and we never know when our last day might be, but it, you know, it could be brought about sooner by these things. And, you know, do you want to be like that on your last day on this earth? Who knows, you know? So absolutely couldn't agree with you more. Now, finally, the thing that I think's on all of our minds is vaccine. Is it going to come? Are we get it? What are your thoughts on the vaccine?
My thoughts on the vaccine. I'm not a vaccinologist, and I've not been following it very closely, but I have been sort of, you know, on the periphery, and I think it seems like they're tanking along pretty well, and pretty speedily to get a vaccine out in record time. Yeah, so I think the Oxford vaccine, for example, is modelled on stuff that was kind of in development even before this pandemic, because this coronavirus is a version of SARS, like it's very, very closely related to SARS. So kind of, you know, there'd been work going on behind the scenes anyway before this pandemic came along, to sort of develop a vaccine for this type of pandemic. I think people are worried that it's so speedy because they worry about the safety issues of that. But I think we should be reassured in that, like, you know, that it's still going through all the safety trials that it would have done anyway at a non-pandemic time. It's just, it's all sort of being done in parallel, and the paperwork's being done quicker than usual. But still, I mean, it still will take, I think we will get vaccines, and I think we'll probably not just get one vaccine, we'll get like different types of vaccine that are suitable for different kinds of groups and different kinds of people. But it still will take time, and it will still, you know, even once it's available, it'll take a while to roll out amongst the population. So although, you know, I reckon that will help bring this to an end eventually. It's not a magic bullet that we should all just be waiting for. In the meantime, we do still have to keep up with the sort of difficult but boring, but, you know, like hands face, ventilation, you know, testing and tracing. All of those things are going to remain pertinent for some months to come, I think. Yeah.
So a tough winter ahead.
Yeah. Tough winter ahead. Invest in a really good coat so you can still see your friends.
Yeah. Dr. Georgia Ladbury, you're an inspiration. Thanks ever so much for coming on the show. It was great.
Thank you very much, Ken. It's always lovely talking to you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.